Now, this first section is from the Book of Unlimited Hangouts, chapter Darktrace in Cyber Reason, and our translator is Johnny Vedmore. Now, this is a quote from Johnny, from the article, or the chapter, excuse me. We're now at a point in history where either the coming events will be studied for thousands of years or will be remembered as the point where we lost humanity completely. Now, in this chapter, Johnny reaffirms the idea that really the weird tech bros may be leading our society into the AI future as if they were creating software in their mom's basement. Okay? And this is very simple. It comes down to one quote that a lot of us may have heard, right? And that quote is, move fast and break things. Okay? When you're like jerking off in a sock and you're like working on your mom's computer, that's not a problem. You can do that. That's not an issue at all, actually. But when it comes down to people's lives, this becomes something very dark, very fast. Especially when you got this, when you suffer particularly from this very real, really what is actually a mental illness, which should be an actual psychology-backed understanding and definition behind this mental illness. But this idea, it really arises from being surrounded by yes men or people who just want the money that you could provide them, right? Now, even though many of these people are just ordinary, like at best slightly above ordinary in intelligence, and they believe themselves to be brilliant and see really their money as really just an actual something that is tangible that proves their brilliance, right? And we talked about this concept before, right? This idea of the talk about this particular idea. This can be explained by a zodiac sign, right? And just bear with me for a second. This idea of Sagittarius rules over things like wealth, luck, riches. And it also rules over the idea of higher knowledge, intelligence, philosophy, okay? So these people, they see themselves and this light, and there's a very real understanding behind the impulse to see your wealth as proof of your intelligence and your ability to philosophize, I guess. But the reality is that these two things aren't connected in a way to where wealth should be treated as tangible evidence of intelligence. So this idea, I think is really explained by this idea of Elon Musk, right? He live streamed himself playing a video game that he claimed to be one of the best at, right? He was on the top leaderboards or something, right? And after this particular, kind of live stream, and everybody kind of got up in a hay about it, he admitted to actually paying someone to boost his profile to appear to be a top-ranked player, right? And to seasoned players who reviewed the live stream, it was obvious that he had no real experience or skill. But he was so disillusioned that he felt comfortable turning on the live stream and playing the game in front of millions of Twitter users, right? And there are plenty of things wrong with Elon in general, and I invite you to check out Elon Musk and the Renaissance, where I showcase more. But what is really disturbing is the little regard that this man has for human life in general. I've hypothesized that this culture is really just something that is plaguing the Silicon Valley types in general, though, right? Now, back to this particular chapter, when it comes to AI, Johnny points out how these guys are rushing into really unventured space where we should most certainly be baby stepping, okay? And this particular idea of rushing turns really brings in this idea of, or this understanding of how we rushed into the nuclear energy age, the age of nuclear energy, if you will, right? And it's simple. We were projecting that nuclear energy would take over as this main provider and render coal and fossil fuels and relics of the past just essentially useless, right? And this was supposed to happen by 2000, like the 2020s, right? This should have been the norm, okay? And back in the day, I want to say, what is it, like the throughout the 1900s, I'm not sure the exact dates, but the governments were convinced to rush into the future. And this was really, what really helped sell this was the idea was they needed to beat Russia. And for those that don't know, we've done some monstrous things to try to beat Russia. And it's been a very, very dark road. But when it comes down to the US and Russia, like both countries made huge mistakes, right? Russia also wanted to compete with the US, and that kind of very bad things happened for these ideas of around these ideas of also nuclear testing, nuclear weapon testing, before, you know, it was banned by JFK, or, you know, due to JFK's part and role, but also the idea of like nuclear energy plants, nuclear plants coming up. Now, the mistakes made, they killed people. They actually killed people that were working at these plants or running these experiments and helping run these experiments. But they also ruined cities for an extremely long time. Okay, some people are like just getting back to like 2020s. They were literally just getting to, you know, back to their particular island where one hydrogen bomb test went completely wrong. But they also, the idea was that people realized, like, hey, we don't want this stuff in our backyard, and eventually politicians stopped trying to sell nuclear energy to their populace, right? Now, coming back to this particular chapter in general, if you want to look at how unregulated these guys are, I think social media is really a great place to start, right? Because adults, we look at kids and we wonder why they would possibly ruin their lives on cameras for clicks and views. But we really don't understand the environment that they're growing up in, okay? Social media companies are designing their apps to be addictive and increase ad revenue, right? Move fast and break things, okay? This is the culture. Tech companies, they pay off our politicians on both sides of the aisle, so the political spotlight stays off of these weirdos, and they're made to feel even more like geniuses because they're not regulated. Nobody is coming in with people who actually know what they're doing and telling them otherwise, right? Because our politicians know that this is a source of funding, so they're going to do whatever they say in a lot of cases. And now I want you to realize just how bold a lot of these guys are, right? So besides Elon Musk, we got Mark Zuckerberg claiming that people need AI friends to help with the loneliness epidemic. Okay? He gets on camera, knowing the power that he holds in society. And he says this, right? These are not level-headed, healthy adults. They have tremendous power to influence society. And this is a tremendous problem in the making, okay? These ideas, this concept, what's happening in the tech culture, the people who are running it, it goes right back to this concept here, okay? When it comes down to AI in general, it is linked to all these things, okay? Johnny points out how the idea of cybersecurity is largely untested, but it is replacing humans in the cybersecurity field. I'm going to just go on this is a wild guess, right? But the idea is, it is less money that needs to be paid out when you can replace humans with AI. So that's probably a tremendous driving force, right? Because a lot of these companies, a lot of these corporations, these owners and executives, they are giddy about the idea of firing people, and it is crazy. I recently read like this particular story where when they told about the history of clockmaking, right, and how clocks were introduced in society. Clocks really, when they first came into society, they were at first introduced at a level to where like basically only the rich people had clocks, and they would literally have factory workers dependent on them. So in terms of the clocks and the time of day that they got off, and these guys just like a lot of these guys are just absolutely insane, we'll say, right? But even when these guys started to get clocks, they actually confiscated the clocks when they first started getting clocks. And there was like one guy who, even if they even had knowledge about like how the sun and the sky reflected based on time of day, if they had that type of knowledge, sometimes they'd just be fired outright, because then other people would be asking them, hey, how much time we got left? It's like these guys are crazy. These guys are absolutely crazy in so many different cases, and we don't even we don't realize just how off the rails things are getting. But in terms of this idea, right, like this is in terms of Johnny, Johnny points out how really these systems are very intimately intertwined with former intelligence operatives from CIA, M15 or MI5, but apparently there's a unit 8200 from Israel that may be leading, or maybe really taking a prominent role in a lot of this stuff, which is that it's dark. It's definitely, I mean, this is it's getting, if you've been paying attention at all, it gets very crazy when you talk about how really these intelligence operation, or these intelligence agencies, are so connected, right? But Darktrace, right, that's where Johnny's main focus is here, and I must say that it's shocking to understand like how intertwined this company is to intelligence, right? Because I'm not even sure if they're trying to hide it, or no, well, actually they are, crazy enough. But the idea is they have a board stacked with people with connections or histories with various agencies, now including connections with Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, right? And You guys probably don't know this unless you've like looked at Whitney Webb's book. In terms of this sister was used during this Promise software scandal, right? And the Promise software scandal, there's a whole lot behind it, right? But essentially, this was software that was essentially that was used to give Israel backdoors to spy on American politicians, right? And I'm what is it called? I'm just phrasing that in my own particular way, so the particular phrasing might be off, but the idea was that software had backdoors for Israel, and that software ended up in the hands of politicians, okay? Now, the idea here is that it is like when they actually did try to hide this, right? Like I said, they actually did think about like, hey, maybe we shouldn't tell people that we're actually the Alphabet Agency. And what is crazy is that they got called out. They got called out at a literal conference, and some reporter actually called them out. Thank good, which is really nice to hear that we got reporters like that. But the idea was right after this, or not right after, but after being called out, they were still able to grow in relevance and really just become a primary platform for a lot of different governments in terms of cybersecurity, or they're setting themselves up to be the primary platform. I'm not sure exactly how relevant they are in terms of the systems that other governments use, but they are becoming and spreading their influence regardless. And this is despite what we know, and this is despite what's being said about them, which is crazy, right? But I mean, this is, it's grown to the point to where a lot of these people don't find the need to hide their allegiances and aims in many cases anymore. And regardless, they're still very, very much aware. They're not completely out in the open yet, which is probably a good sign, but also it is something to watch out for. But Johnny talks about a few other entities as well, but I think a really common theme here is that they have a connection to intelligence, they're bold, and they have an overinflated sense of self-importance. That's what comes across to me when I looked at this particular, what Johnny was talking about here, okay? And I say this probably too often, maybe, and probably hear about this even more, but we are for sale regarding any of the politicians that have power to change anything, right? I think I really want people to understand that. The people that have power, they are churned through a system where they accumulate drag load, whether it's gradually or all at once. However, they make sure that they accumulate drag load on their way to the top, right? All the way until a point to where the baby politicians, they may be innocent. I'll say that. They may be innocent. They may be decent people. Even a few people in Congress may be decent people. But when we talk about the people who have the connections, the understanding to change things, to really get let's say military assistance, some kind of military intelligence, these are people who are churned through the system, right? And this is, there's something very much, even in the, I'm reminded of just the whole Vietnam thing with My Lai. For those that don't know, it was just basically, Vietnam was essentially a clown show, and a lot of these guys who got medals were just, it makes you think about who has a medal and why they have a medal, and just the idea of maybe checking where a person served and what happened before you say thank you for your service, honestly. Because, it really is something with a lot of these guys. But when it comes down to these guys in the military, there was a culture there that allowed for this My Lai incident to take place, where essentially Vietnam, they were killing civilians and counting them as combatants if they were killed. Like, if there's a dead person, then they're a combatant. That was it. That was the culture. And in this particular incident, I believe that was Seymour Hersh that pointed that out. But in any case, what was really found out was how after Seymour Hersh was blowing the whistle, there was no, there was a culture of, hey, we need to keep this guy covered up. And allegedly, I don't know if I have to say this, but I'll say allegedly, they tried to kill him, right? And they just, allegedly, they put bombs in his car. They did all types of, bomb on his car, and he only got saved because somebody came in and warned him about it or something. It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. But you started to realize, like, the people at the top, they aren't the guys who go out to beer with the guys. They're not, right? Like in the military, the culture of military, the people who have all those stars and everything, they accumulated those stars because they paid attention. They respected the systems of hierarchy, right? Regardless of whether, and it could have been promoted because their superior was an actual dirtbag and they didn't say anything. So eventually they would become a dirtbag, and everybody knew that they could be corrupted. So, there is a system in place that makes sure that people do certain things. If you try to disrespect that system of hierarchy and say, hey, look, this, you go outside the chain of command and say, hey, look, I've got a problem with my officer. He's telling people to kill civilians or something like that. It's kind of weird. Or people are killing civilians in front of him and he's not doing anything. Next thing you know, the guy didn't even report that you reported to him about this particular incident, right? This idea of the systems in place, it has a very real, tangible effect on what happens in society. Okay, now when it comes down to this idea of Darktrace, what it does in society, who they're able to pay off, why, even the tech bros in general, what's happening. There's a system in place that says, hey, once you pay the right people, everything else, we kind of just, we don't even know, all of those, like, what is it, the EFF or something, the privacy tech guys, they're not, those nonprofit watchdogs, we're not even gonna, like, listen to them. We're not gonna hold any, like, they're not even gonna make it to any platforms to really talk to people, talk to politicians. Don't even worry about it. But essentially, these people, they view us in a way to where we need to have a deeper understanding of the actual illness that is in this particular tech industry. Even with the politicians, right? Or especially with the politicians. What am I talking about? Especially with the politicians, we got a problem here. And they, like, in episode 2, we discussed the Panama Papers, right? And what's funny here is why I bring this up is because politicians were just essentially platforming themselves as the people who fight corruption, or the Pandora Papers, excuse me. But with the Pandora Papers, they were literally exposed as having offshore bank accounts, offshore mansions, storing money. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy because, like, these, and when it comes down to just the corruption that exists, That's one avenue, but in terms of, even with Johnny in this particular article, Johnny talks about how these companies, they're actually platforming themselves as protectors of cyberspace. And I really can't help but wonder if the government's going to ignore all of the voices of reasons while they march us off of this cliff. Okay? When it comes down to this particular sermon, it's important that we realize that we are in the age of Aquarius, okay? And Aquarius rules over a spectrum of things. But for this segment, I want you guys to understand that Aquarius rules over artificial intelligence, okay? Now, astrologers will likely see the appeal for AI reflected in the astrological weather. But I also want to point out that Aquarius also rules over the collective and communities as a whole, okay? It rules over social movements by the collective, okay? This, in terms of this idea of what we can do, what's possible, we need to inhabit as a collective, we need to inhabit the energy of Aquarius to really put a limit on a lot of these people in a lot of cases, okay? Because if we don't inhabit that space, that energetic space, it does look like the tech bros are gearing up to do that, to exactly that. Now, there is a future segment in this particular episode that speaks to the Dragon King event, okay? And I highly recommend that you watch that as well.